Hello and welcome to a look at the history of the Idaho Commission for Libraries, all the way back to its founding in 1901. I'd like to start with a special thanks to archivist and librarian Julia Stringfellow for permission to use elements of slides she created in 2012. I'd also like to thank the Columbian Club because they were very instrumental in the founding of the Commission. Early in its statehood, stagecoaches delivered traveling libraries to Idaho settlements, mining camps, and outposts. The wooden boxes contained volumes for every age and every interest. The traveling library was the precursor to the Idaho Commission for Libraries and was formed by the Columbian Club of Boise in 1899. These boxes were a way to bring culture and education to 51 settlements in the Idaho Territory. Created with an annual operating budget of just $3,000, the 1901 Idaho legislative session created the state library. It was charged with organizing new libraries and improving existing ones. Idaho took pride in its state library services. The traveling library brought a civilizing and educational force to its 51 settlements, including large towns and small ones all across the state. This is a picture of some of those traveling library boxes. One of them still exists today, and we have it at the state library offices in Boise. The first state librarian was Eva Dockery, and she served from 1901 to 1903. She was a member of the Columbian Club that launched the traveling libraries and was a reporter and editor of the Society page for the Idaho Statesman for more than 30 years. Described as something of a social arbiter for the capital city, by 1904 there were 100 communities that were receiving books as part of the traveling library. The next state librarian was Serena Belle Chamberlain, and she served from 1903 to 1905. She was one of Idaho's first women to serve as state school superintendent. She taught at Boise Central School and was part of Boise's High Society. Her name appeared frequently in the Society page of the Idaho Statesman. She was known as an extensive traveler, perhaps funded by her $50 per month salary. Margaret Stevenson Roberts came next as the state librarian, serving from 1905 to 1907. You'll see her name a number of times in this presentation. Though she didn't become state librarian in 1905, she started at the Idaho State Library in 1903. She was known as the Petticoat Governor of Idaho. E. Louise Johnson was served as state librarian from 1908 to 1910. She traveled throughout Idaho visiting library stations and promoting library services. At this point, there were 158 library stations in the traveling library. A snapshot of Idaho in 1910 shows us that the state population had grown to 326,000 residents. Tax-supported public libraries had been established in 12 cities, and nearly every school district in the state had a school library. At this time, the Idaho State Library had more than 12,400 volumes in it. Being the adventurer that she was, Chamberlain had a brush with death as the cable that was guiding her ferry boat across the falls came disconnected and they were stranded in the middle of the river. Fortunately, everyone was saved, but this clipping from a 1907 Statesman gives further details of the adventure. Margaret Stevenson Roberts came back for her second term from 1911 to 1917. And during this time, she expanded the free traveling library system and created a single loan system in 1914. Additionally, during this time frame, she established the Idaho State Library Association in 1915. Marie Schreiber was the state librarian from 1917 to 1919, and she selected as state librarian when Democrats won the 1917 election. Some of the work that she completed was creating a route map for state traveling libraries to follow, and during World War I, she gathered thousands of books and shipped them to soldiers overseas. At this time, the traveling library supplied 234 stations with cases. Margaret Stevenson Roberts was back for her third term from 1919 to 1933. This time around, her salary was $125 a month. And more than 4,000 borrowers were using the single loan system that she created. By the 1920s, every major city in Idaho and many smaller communities boasted a library. 10 of those were built with Carnegie grants. These grants required local community support, much like private and federal grants of today. A snapshot of Idaho at the time in the 1930s shows us that more than 445,000 people called Idaho home. The 1930s had a couple of state librarians. Lila Bedford served from 1933 to 1939, and she cataloged more than 14,000 books and began use of the Dewey Decimal System and card catalog at the Idaho State Library. She was president of ILA from 1933 to 1934, and she wrote the Library Development Plan for Idaho that still informs some of the work that the Idaho Commission for Libraries does today. The next state librarian was Walter Lockwood, serving from 1939 to 1942. And he was a professionally trained librarian and oversaw Idaho's first library education program that began in 1938 under Bedford. Unfortunately, in 1939, Lockwood had to deal with a budget cut of 33% and staff was cut as well. Bedford was a former librarian at the Caldwell Carnegie Library, and Lockwood started his career as a page at the Boise Public Library. Pictured here is the Boise High School Library in the 1930s. There were a number of state librarians in the 1940s, including Grace McDonald Belle from 42 to 43, Mabel Jose Adamson from 43 to 44, and Zeta Lee Wines from 44 to 47. Idaho State Library was in a holding pattern during the 1940s, partially due to a budget cut all the way down to $14,000 a year. So understandably, there were few books purchased during this period. However, the Idaho Librarian debuted in 1945, which was a publication that was founded by the Idaho State Library Association. Margaret Stevenson Roberts came back for her fourth and final term as state librarian from 1947 to 1952. She was also a historian at the Idaho State Historical Society and served in this role until her death in 1952. During her time in Boise, she also opened a bookshop and loan library to serve residents in the area. In the 50s, in Idaho, the population had grown to 588,637 residents. Idaho State Library moved to the basement of the Idaho State Historical Society's museum in Boise, and the Idaho State Library Association, now the Idaho Library Association, was reorganized and decided to actively work on legislation. Publication of the Idaho Librarian resumed, and Eli Obler was the editor, who was also the namesake of the Idaho State University Library in Pocatello. Edith Robinson served as state librarian from 1952 to 1957. The Idaho State Library, now under the governance of the State Library Board of Trustees. And she's the first librarian in Idaho to receive state retirement benefits when she retired in 1963. Additionally, she was one of the first female commercial photographers in Idaho. In 1957, the Idaho legislature more than doubled the state library's budget, allowing the agency to receive federal grants. With these monies, local libraries demonstrated innovative services such as bookmobiles and children's story times. These early grants were the precursor of the more than $1.3 million in federal funds administered by the State Library in Idaho today. Eugene Hart served as the state librarian from 1957 to 1959. During that time, the State Library Board provided a budget of $35,000 to build library collection, buy films and projectors, and purchase the first library bookmobile. During this time, there was also the creation of the Idaho State Library Planning Committee, and a new library newsletter called Library Gems was launched. Hart was the first professionally trained state librarian since Walter Lockwood. Henry Drennan served as state librarian from 1959 to 1961. He's quoted as saying, "The reason for being of the State Library Agency is the development of public library services." He received ALA's Lippincott Award in 1978 for his distinguished service to the profession. Part of this was attributed to his extensive writing on the unserved and underserved library populations in the country. Helen Miller served as the state librarian from 1962 to 1980. During that time, a depository for state documents was established at the state library. After the Library Service Act was revamped in 1964, federal dollars went toward library buildings, the final grant being awarded in 1998. This helped support work on more than 100 projects to build or remodel public library buildings in Idaho during Miller's time as state librarian. Miller is quoted as saying, "The librarian is the first step in informing decision makers about the needs of the library." Additionally, she started a scholarship program for new librarians to support them in furthering their education. In 1973, the Talking Book Library began to serve people whose disabilities made it difficult to use printed materials. Today, special playing machines and recorded books and digital books are sent statewide to provide free literature to thousands of patrons. In 1973, the state library was designated by the legislature as the site for the Regional Library for the Blind and Physically Handicapped Services, which is what it was called at the time. At its beginning, there were 889 registered borrowers. That number grew over the next year to 1,188. By the time 1984 rolled around, the state library had 2,908 users and circulated 87,947 items to them. Charles Bowles served as state librarian from 1980 all the way to 2005. He traveled throughout the state to visit libraries, meet their staff, and learn about the whole state library system. In 1984, under his leadership, the state library went under a reorganization effort. And in 1998, the Libraries Linking Idaho network debuted. Today's state library complements its traditional services and programs with more high-tech offerings and solutions for Idaho's library community. Bowles continued to serve as a continuing education consultant after his tenure as state librarian. Additionally, he served the longest uninterrupted term of any Idaho state librarian. The next state librarian was Ann Jocelyn, who served from 2005 to 2019. However, she started working at the state library in 1979. And she worked with the Library Development Department since it started in 1984. In 1992 and 2003, Jocelyn was awarded ILA's Librarian of the Year Award. And effective July 1st, 2006, the Idaho State Library changed its name and mission to the Idaho Commission for Libraries, and the Board of Trustees was renamed from the Board of Commissioners. Our last and current state librarian is Stephanie Bailey White. She started serving as state librarian in 2019, but started working at the Idaho Commission for Libraries back in 1991 as the Public Information Officer. In 1997, she helped launch the very successful Read to Me literacy program. And in 2016, she was promoted to Deputy State Librarian before becoming the State Librarian. Stephanie is quoted as saying, "I'm fully committed to the ICfL's mission and inspired on a daily basis by what Idaho library staff are doing to make our state an even better place in which to live." Thank you so much for joining as we take a look at the history of the Idaho Commission for Libraries and all of the state librarians that have helped bring us to where we are today.